Bruchim Abayim, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tuesday Night Beit Midrash, where we are undertaking a series known as Now You Know. And we're talking about some very difficult subjects we encounter when we are seeking to exercise our messianic faith in predominantly non-messianic culture. When we make the statement to someone that we're following the dietary restrictions or instructions found in Leviticus 11 or the Moedim found in Leviticus 23, we often encounter arguments from the New Testament, usually from the writings of Paul, that seem to counter our faith and understanding. In this series, we are seeking to educate the body of the Messiah in preparation for his return by taking literally what the Apostle Peter stated. But before we get into that, let us do our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your commandments, commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. And we read in 2 Peter 3, verses 11 through 12. So therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Tonight, we'll be seeking to undo a huge myth about the Apostle Paul. The myth is the assertion that Paul played the hypocrite with people. People have brought forth this picture or image of Paul that he acted as a Jew when he was in front of Jewish people, and he acted like a Gentile when in front of Gentiles, based on this passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, which states, "For though I am free of all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Messiah, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might partake of it with you." So, having read through this passage, I know a lot of you have encountered this passage, and you've probably heard someone make a statement somewhere along the lines of, Paul did this when he was in front of these people, and Paul did that when he was in front of those people. To give you an example, there's a commentary from the website thebiblesays.com, which states this: Paul kept the Jewish customs rigorously as an example to those who were under the law, which were Jews. This statement is true. Paul behaved as under the law by keeping the Jewish customs, even though he knew that in Christ it was unnecessary. This is false. He recognized that in Christ he was not himself under the law. Paul saw that the Jewish customs were just customs, habits. This is super false and incorrect. They had no connection with being justified in the sight of God. This is a true statement. And they were not the path to gain righteousness in living. And he quotes Romans 9:30 verses 32. This statement is false. However, his goal was to win those who were under the law. So he met the Jews where they were. He did not want to create a stumbling block. He set aside his own comfort for the benefit of others. Now, I want to use that expression that Paul used, or what they said was, and they were not the path to gain righteousness in living. That is incorrect, because we read in Deuteronomy chapter 6, where we get the Shema, that at the end of the chapter, they said that these laws and these statutes were to be our righteousness. It's to be righteousness for us in living, and if we keep them, we will be guarded by them. So for them to make the statement that they were not the path to gain righteousness in living, that is incorrect. Okay? Keeping the Torah in order to gain a forensic righteousness of salvation before God, now that would be a correct statement. But they said righteousness in living, and that goes completely against what Deuteronomy chapter 6 says at the end of the chapter. Another commentary by the website called versebyversecommentary.com states this: the principle of accommodation is good if it is restricted to a method, but if applied to truth, then it is evil. In his approach to Jewish people, Paul accommodated himself to Jewish customs and dietary laws. He had no obligation to keep the Mosaic law. And they quote Romans 6:14, "This is false." Paul, as a Jew, had every obligation to keep the Torah, but he chose to keep it for the Jews' sake. As with the Jews, Paul adapted his methods to the Gentiles when he was with Gentiles, so they did not have written revelations, so he ate what they ate. He did not follow kosher rules when he was with them. This is incorrect as well. This is false. Without law does not mean that Gentiles have no law, but they do not follow the Mosaic law. Okay? That is true. Gentiles, they have law, but it's just not the Torah. Now, I want to point out that both of these commentaries express the same sentiment. Paul acted like he was a Torah-keeping Jew when he was in front of the Jews, and for some odd reason that it was for their own sakes. I don't comprehend what that statement is supposed to mean. However, how is acting like a hypocrite effective for someone else's sake, and it's beneficial for them when you're acting like a hypocrite? I don't understand. Why did he act like a Jew in front of Jews, and for somehow or another it was for their sake? If Paul really believed that the Torah was done away with, then keeping kosher or observing any of the Moedim, Paul was just putting on a show. He didn't really believe it. And if this was the case, he was not communicating the correct message if he played dress-up with the Jews when he was around them. You understand the point I'm trying to get at? If he really truly believed that the Torah was done away with, then why play around and be deceitful with the Jewish people? I'm going to tell you that this is a big no-no. We don't play dress-up and be deceitful to Jewish people. And it's happened. It's happened in Israel. It's happened in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods where people will dress up and act like they're Orthodox in order to try to convert people to Christianity. This happens all of the time. It's happening in the Messianic movement. People pay dress up just so they can gain some sort of favor with the Orthodox community or the conservative or traditional believing Jewish community. Only with an agenda, not that they're actually Torah-keeping people who want to be a part of the Commonwealth of Israel. They're doing it with an agenda and being deceitful. And unfortunately, this is how this passage is read, that this is what Paul did. But we're going to uncover that and say, no, that's not what Paul did. Certainly not. And then they go on to say that when Paul's with Gentiles, he took off his Jewish hat and he put on his Gentile baseball cap and he ate pork chops on Sunday after church. How was this for the sake of the Gentiles? Did Paul believe the Torah was abolished, completed, and fulfilled, or not? Which one was it? Was he playing the hypocrite with the Jews, or was he playing the hypocrite with the Gentiles? How is it productive to play both sides of the fence when ministering the gospel message? You see, it's deceitful. And when people start sniffing out deceit, they reject the entire message, and this has become a problem in bringing the gospel message forward. The answer is that Paul did not play both sides of the fence. It is disingenuous to play act. Another aspect of this problem we find when considering the methodology of Paul is, did Yeshua himself abrogate the Torah? And the answer is categorically no. We've already covered this issue in another episode of Tuesday Night Beit Midrash, Now You Know series. It's titled Jesus Fulfilled the Law. I highly encourage you to go back to our YouTube channel at Derech HaYashar Ministries and check out that teaching on Matthew chapter 5. We won't belabor that subject here. It suffices to say that we've already established that Yeshua did not abrogate or do away with any part of the Torah whatsoever. So if Yeshua did not end the Torah and abolish the law, then did Paul have the right or the authority to go against his master and teacher, who is Yeshua? Certainly the one who called himself the apostle, the shaliach of Yeshua the Messiah, did not bring another message than the one who commissioned him to be his shaliach, to be his emissary. You see, an emissary does not have the authority to change the message of the one who sent them. If Yeshua did not change the message of the Father, then Paul did not change the message of Yeshua. And this is the logic that we need to follow. Either Yeshua changed the law or he didn't. That is the foundational question. If Yeshua didn't change the law, and we come to the conclusion that Paul did, then Paul is heretical, false apostle, and we should rip all of his writings right out of the Bible. The only reason that they've come to this conclusion is it's universally understood that Paul's writings are hard to understand. We read in 2 Peter 3:14 through 16. Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, without spot and blameless, and consider that the long-suffering of our Lord is salvation, as also our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given to him, has written to you, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to understand, which untaught and unstable people twist to their own destruction, as they do also the rest of the Scriptures. It oftentimes appears as though Paul is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. If you take a cursory read through Paul's letters, you'll find that sometimes he says one thing in one side, and then it appears like he's contradicting himself in another passage. Let's take, for instance, Galatians 5:2 through 6. It says, Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Messiah will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Messiah, you who attempt to be justified by law, you have fallen from grace. For we, through the Spirit, eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Messiah Yeshua neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. So in this passage, it appears to say that if you get circumcised, then you are rejecting Yeshua's saving work on the cross, and it will not benefit the person who does so. Okay, so we go to the book of Acts, chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. And it states, Then he came to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there, named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek. He was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted to have him go on with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. Okay, so we just read Galatians 5, in which Paul says, if you get circumcised, it will profit you nothing, and you've basically forsaken the Messiah. And then we see in Acts 16 that he circumcises Timothy. Did Paul just doom Timothy by circumcising him? I mean, if Paul really believed that circumcision means that one has forsaken Yeshua as the Messiah and forfeited their salvation, then he's made a huge error. Did Paul not know what he wrote in the book of Galatians? I mean, the book of Galatians, it came before Acts 15. We see the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, in which they basically gave a decree to say that they gave a decree to say that they were not going to put these types of things on the Gentiles, and circumcision was not one of them. And yet in Acts 16, he turns right around and circumcises Timothy, who happened to be Greek by Jewish code of law. And we see in Galatians 5 that he said if you become circumcised, it benefits you nothing. If Paul did forget what he wrote earlier, Or was he playing a hypocrite with the Jews, as Acts 16 states that Paul circumcised Timothy because of the Jews in that region? You see, if that's the case, Paul was playing a very dangerous game with people's lives. If that's the case, if we see that he's playing fast and loose with people, with the Torah, with the belief in the Messiah, with circumcision, then by all means, if that is exactly how Paul was working, then he's playing a dangerous game. But the thing is Paul that wasn't a hypocrite. Nor did he play fast and loose with people's lives, with the Torah, with belief in Mashiach. He didn't do that. Paul was very much educated. When he spoke of circumcision in Galatians 5, what he meant was that Gentiles should not convert to become legally Jewish and base their salvation on being ethnically Jewish. That's what he was talking about. Timothy was a Gentile based on the fact that his father was a Greek. At that time, Jewishness was not dependent on the mother's lineage like it is today. It was according to the father's lineage. Timothy was circumcised not to become legally Jewish, but to keep the commandments of God. You see, there's a difference. Circumcision for Jewish legal status is not the same thing as believing in Messiah Yeshua as the Messiah and then keeping the commandments of God. Circumcision in the Torah is an outward sign of a covenant responsibility one has taken upon themselves after they have believed in God. You see, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. And as Paul talks about in Romans chapter 4, was this before his circumcision or after circumcision? And Paul was very adamant. He said it was before his circumcision. He believed God before he got circumcised, and therefore it was counted to him as righteousness. And then he followed the commandment of God when God told him you should circumcise yourself. Okay, so the fact that Timothy got circumcised, it was not in order to become legally Jewish and to rely upon his ethnic legal status to receive salvation. That was not the case. He was merely keeping the commandment of God. But in Galatians 5, Paul is warning people that if you convert to become legally Jewish and you use your ethnic status as your means of salvation, he says it won't benefit you anything. So having established now at this particular point that Paul is not a hypocrite, nor was he being deceitful in his approach of the gospel, let's re-examine this passage from 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, which states, For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Messiah. And keep that verse right there in mind. Not being without law toward God, but under law toward Messiah. That I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker of it with you. This is one of those passages that seem to say that Paul was playing the hypocrite in front of the different groups of people. He acted like a Jew in front of Jews. He acted like a Gentile in front of Gentiles. Let's put first things first. Paul states, For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. What exactly does he mean that? Well, in the previous passages, Paul makes a bold statement in proclaiming that he has the freedom to take donations and live among the people utilizing their material blessings. However, he chose not to do that so that the gospel would not be hindered. So that begs the question, why would the gospel be hindered, you might ask? Well, during that time, some people were actually accusing the Apostle Paul of huckstering the gospel, meaning he was being a mooch and using the gospel as a means to become wealthy and to support himself. In order to stay this rumor, Paul decided it was expedient to forego his freedom of support and work a job to earn a living and support himself. This is what Paul was meaning by that. I'm free from all men, meaning you can't accuse me of huckstering the gospel for gain. He decided he was going to take a physical labor job in order to support himself. So when he says that he uses the term for all, term servant to all, in context that it means that he made use of a trade to serve others in the community. If you've given any amount of thought to the occupations of the secular world, you'll realize that every job is in the service of humanity. The food industry is about serving people and their need for sustenance. Healthcare, people's need for help in their physical, in their health. Construction, people need housing. They need houses and buildings built to conduct their business and to live in their homes. Transportation, it's moving goods from one place to another for people. All jobs are about serving the needs for other human beings. And when Paul makes the statement that he was a servant to all, just means that he was busy in the community as a tradesman. That's what he was doing. He was serving all people. So we need to take a look at a very important word in this passage that is used 5 times. It is the word win. We looked at the passage and I highlighted them in orange. Paul is seeking to win people over. Does this mean win souls, as in the evangelistic sense of winning people to Jesus? Does this mean that Paul was walking around his job site or wherever he was doing whatever he was doing, asking people if they know Jesus and are they saved? Is that what Paul means to win them over? Well, the answer is no. Paul forfeited his freedoms in order to gain or to win over others. The term in Greek is used of acquiring money or possessions, but that's not the only use of the word. We read in Matthew 18:15 that states, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother." Here the word is used in reference to another person having been gained or won over through one's actions by restoring them to right standing, i.e. restoring them from sin. So Paul's goal was to win over people to the gospel in which he was made a steward. Those who didn't know Yeshua, but also those who did know Yeshua but needed a fuller understanding of what that means. He also brought this message to those who needed to know about the membership in the family of God without going through a formal conversion process to become Jewish. Essentially, Paul was ministering to everybody in the community. He was ministering to everybody in the community. So his desire was to win them over to a Torah lifestyle. Paul says, "To the Jew, I became as a Jew." Now, if you think about this statement for just a minute, wasn't Paul already a Jew? So how did he become a Jew to the Jews? Surely this can't mean that Paul was a Christian and decided to go undercover by wearing tzitzit and a kippah. The text reveals itself to us, the people group of which Paul is speaking. Those who are under the Torah is a shorthand reference to those Jews who don't know Yeshua and hold to the position of covenant inclusion based on ethnicity, i.e. because they are sons of Abraham. The current understanding within the Judaism of the time was that they became saved or had salvation based on their covenant inclusion through birth. Those who are under the law that Paul talks about are the Orthodox Pharisees who rely on their ethnic status for covenant inclusion. Paul submitted himself under the authority of the Pharisees because Yeshua himself explained that they sit in the seat of Moses and became as a Jew, meaning he still adhered to the mandates of the Torah as outlined by communal standards. This is what it means for Paul to become a Jew. He submitted himself under their authority. There's a real problem in the Messianic movement today when it comes to rabbinic authority. If Paul subjected himself under the communal authority, why then is there a general resistance to the majority of halakha? Paul became as a Jew in the form of keeping his relationship open to those who persecuted him for his belief in Yeshua as the Messiah. He would rather submit himself to the whip for his belief in Messiah than to walk away from the community and leave his brothers behind. You see, Paul's belief in Yeshua was not wrong, nor did it merit punishment. Yet Paul endured it, knowing that they did it out of ignorance because of the veil placed over their hearts, and he stayed within the good graces of the community, that some might believe in Yeshua and turn from their stance of covenant inclusion by means of their birthright. Who are those that are without Torah in this passage in 1 Corinthians 9? According to the Pharisees, they are Gentiles, whether they believed in Yeshua or not. Those who did believe in Yeshua, Paul instructed them that they are not to convert to become legally Jewish, so then, according to the Orthodox synagogue, they were without Torah. Not being without law toward God, but under law toward Messiah, means that they weren't necessarily without Torah, but their Torah was centered around the Messiah. But to the Orthodox synagogue, they were still outside of the community because the Orthodox halakha of conversion to become legally Jewish. So we have a clear-cut case here that Paul is identifying believers in Yeshua who in fact were Torah observant. He makes the statement that they weren't without the Torah of God, but their Torah was observed in Messiah Yeshua. Just to be sure that I'm being clear here, the believers in Yeshua just didn't convert to become legally Jewish and therefore were considered sinners by the Orthodox rulers. They observed the Torah, but they just didn't convert, and that put them outside of the community. This is absolutely amazing if you look at this verse in its context. They observed Torah. We have Paul giving us an example of the Gentiles actually observing Torah within the Brit Hadashah, within the New Testament. In the last clause of this passage, we find something very unique. In the previous clauses, Paul explains that he became like a Jew, as in, to the Jew I became like or as a Jew. To those under the law, as or like those under the law. To those without law, he became as or like those without law. But to those who are weak, Paul omits the word as or like. In the New King James Version, it has the word as added, but with a footnote that states that the oldest Greek manuscripts do not contain the Greek word. It isn't present in the Greek in verse 22. It literally means, to the weak, he was weak. What does this mean? All people are weak before God when it comes to receiving mercy and grace. No one deserves anything. Nothing can commend us before God. Not the amount of works we accomplish, not our pedigree, not our standing within the community, not our physical lineage, nor our educational degrees. I don't care how many doctorates that you might have, or how many master's degrees, or whatever prestigious schools that's been attended. These do not commend us before God. Paul understood that all are weak before Hashem, and he identified with every last one of us. Paul ends this passage with the statement that he becomes all things to all men. It's important that we understand this statement in the context of all that we have covered up until this point. Paul didn't act like an Orthodox Jew so he could deceive them into thinking that he was observant when he really wasn't observant. He didn't eat ham sandwiches just to show the Gentiles he was one of the group to make them feel more comfortable. Paul observed the Torah quite stringently. We see that he does exactly as he was instructed in Acts chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself walk orderly and keep the law. Paul was a Hebrew of Hebrews. He was thoroughly Jewish from head to toe. He submitted and identified with his Jewish brothers in every way possible. He identified with the Gentiles in that his covenant status was bestowed in the same manner as theirs, through faith in Yeshua as the long-awaited Messiah of Israel. He didn't believe that his status as a Jew gained him favor with God above and beyond the Gentiles. I hope this clarifies the common misconception that Paul used deceitful tactics to try to trick Jews and Gentiles into accepting the gospel. And in this teaching, we uncovered a gem about Torah observance among the Gentiles of Paul's day. They observed the Torah. It wasn't the Torah of proselyte conversion according to the Orthodox, but the Gentiles did observe the Torah according to Yeshua's instructions. Now you know. I pray that you've been blessed by this teaching. Please consider partnering with us financially as we are continuing to build the kingdom through one tikkun at a time as a community here in the state of Washington. All of your wonderful support through prayers, through encouragement, comments, emails, through financial support, they're all greatly appreciated. We are working very tirelessly here to create a kehilat, a community here that represents those who are in the first century, to represent Messianic Judaism in its fullness, to further the message of that, and to hasten the Geulah. So if you can partner with us, we certainly welcome. Please go to our YouTube channel. If you are already there, hit the like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time we upload a new teaching or any time that we might go live. If you have any passages that you would like to see featured here on Now You Know, please send us an email at Derech HaYashar, info@derechaYashar.org. And with that, I say, have a blessed week, Shavua Tov, and Leitraot.